3 minutes to target. Maintain radio silence. That's the last thing I heard before crossing into enemy airspace. I was piloting an F-15E Strike Eagle on what was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission over contested territory. The briefing made it sound simple. Get in, gather intelligence on suspected weapons installations, get out. But in my 20 years as a fighter pilot, I've learned that routine is just a word they use to keep you from asking too many questions. The morning sky was clear, visibility excellent, perfect conditions for what we were about to do. My weapons systems officer, Thompson, was unusually quiet in the back seat. Usually, he cracked jokes to ease the tension, but today, something felt different. I checked my instruments one last time as we approached the target area. My radar was clear, but something in my gut was screaming that we weren't alone up there. Thompson confirmed my suspicions when he suddenly broke the silence. "Sir, I'm picking up unusual electromagnetic signatures 3 o'clock. Approximately 15 miles. Before I could respond, the aircraft warning systems lit up like a Christmas tree. "Sam lock! Sam lock!" Thompson shouted. I immediately deployed countermeasures and banked hard right, pushing the Strike Eagle to its limits. The missile exploded close enough that I felt the shock wave rock the aircraft. That was too close, I thought, my heart pounding against my ribs. But this was just the beginning of what would become the longest day of my military career. What we didn't know then was that our intelligence was compromised. This wasn't a routine mission. We were flying straight into a trap. As I leveled the aircraft, tried to regain situational awareness, 6 bogies appeared on radar, closing fast from multiple directions. "Thompson, confirm contacts," I said, hoping there was some malfunction with our systems. "Confirmed, sir. MiG-29s, 6 of them. They've got us surrounded." My mind raced through tactical options, none of them good. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and deep in hostile territory. The rules of engagement were clear: avoid confrontation unless directly threatened. But as the enemy fighters tightened their circle around us, it became obvious they weren't here to escort us out of their airspace. I made a split-second decision that would later be scrutinized in debriefing rooms and Pentagon offices. "Thompson, arm air-to-air missiles. We're going to punch a hole through their formation." I pushed the throttle forward, feeling the raw power of twin engines responding. The G-forces pressed me back in my seat as I climbed rapidly, hoping to gain altitude advantage. The lead MiG pilot must have anticipated this move because he matched my climb perfectly, closing to missile range. What happened next would change everything I thought I knew about aerial combat and survival. As I prepared to engage the first enemy fighter, a deafening explosion rocked our aircraft, and warning alarms filled the cockpit. We'd been hit, but from where? And how would we possibly make it home with half the enemy air force on our tail? The missile struck our right engine with devastating precision. The impact sent us into an uncontrolled spin, alarms blaring as the cockpit filled with smoke. "Engine 2 is gone. Fire warning," Thompson shouted over the chaos. My training kicked in as I fought the controls, trying to stabilize with just one engine. The Strike Eagle shuddered violently, bleeding altitude fast. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Raptor 7. We are hit and going down," I transmitted, though I doubted anyone friendly was receiving. Through the canopy, I could see enemy fighters circling like sharks, watching our descent. They didn't need to finish us off. Gravity was doing the job for them. At 12,000 feet, I finally managed to level out somewhat, but our situation was dire. Black smoke billowed from the right side, and multiple systems were failing. "Thompson, we're going to have to eject," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Negative, sir," he responded. "We're over the mountain range. Survival probability is minimal if we punch out here." He was right. Below us stretched miles of rugged, hostile territory. If the fall didn't kill us, exposure or enemy forces would. I made another call, one that contradicted everything in the manual. "We're riding this bird down. Look for somewhere, anywhere we can put her down." The altimeter continued unwinding as I nursed what remained of our crippled jet, searching for any clearing in the endless forest and rock below. What most people don't understand about being shot down is how time seems to stretch and compress simultaneously. In those moments, facing death, my mind was hyper-focused yet strangely calm. I remember my daughter's 5th birthday party just 3 weeks earlier, promising I'd be home for her recital. I thought about my first solo flight, my father's proud face when I earned my wings. Strange, the things that flash through your mind when you're plummeting from the sky in a $30 million coffin. Thompson was working feverishly, jettisoning unnecessary weight and trying to restart Engine 2, even though we both knew it was futile. The ground was coming up fast, but ahead I spotted what looked like a dry riverbed. Not ideal, but better than the rocky forest surrounding it. Brace for impact. This is going to be rough, I shouted as I aimed for our improvised runway. The Strike Eagle hit hard, skipping like a stone across water. The landing gear collapsed instantly, and we were sledding on the aircraft's belly, a shower of sparks trailing behind us. Metal screamed against stone as we plowed through small trees and brush. The canopy cracked, then shattered. Something struck my helmet hard. The last thing I remember before blacking out was Thompson's voice, strangely calm. "Good landing, sir." When I regained consciousness, the cockpit was silent except for the tick of cooling metal and the distant sound of rotor blades. Enemy search helicopters were already looking for us. With a throbbing head and what I later learned was a fractured collarbone, I turned to check on Thompson. What I saw filled me with a dread far worse than the fear of being shot down. Now I wasn't just fighting for my survival. I was responsible for his life, too. Thompson was unconscious, blood trickling from a gash above his right eye. His breathing was shallow but steady, alive but in bad shape. I unbuckled myself, fighting waves of dizziness as I assessed our situation. The Strike Eagle was finished, its fuselage split open like a broken toy. Fuel was leaking everywhere, and the acrid smell of burning electronics filled what remained of the cockpit. We needed to move, and fast. The helicopters were getting closer, their searchlights sweeping the forest not half a mile from our crash site. With my good arm, I released Thompson's harness and dragged him clear of the wreckage. The pain in my collarbone was excruciating, but adrenaline kept me moving. "Come on, Thompson," I muttered. "Don't make me carry you through this whole damn country." Our survival kit was still intact, small miracle there. I quickly took inventory. Emergency beacon, first aid supplies, water purification tablets, signal mirror, compass, and a pistol with 2 magazines. The beacon was tempting, but activating it now would be a dinner bell for enemy forces. They'd reach us long before any rescue team could. I applied field dressings to Thompson's head wound and my own cuts, then assessed our surroundings. We were in a narrow valley, heavy forest on both sides and mountain peaks beyond. According to my last navigation check before we were hit, the border was approximately 47 miles southeast. That meant at least 3 days of travel through hostile territory, assuming Thompson could even walk when he regained consciousness. Night was falling, bringing with it plummeting temperatures. The search helicopters had moved further north, but I knew ground teams would be deployed soon. We needed cover. I dragged Thompson into the thick forest edge, using fallen branches and foliage to create a rudimentary shelter. The effort left me gasping, my broken collarbone screaming in protest. I fashioned a sling from my parachute material and set a primitive alarm system of loose stones around our position. Thompson finally stirred around midnight, confused and in pain. "Did we die?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Not yet, though not for lack of trying," I replied, helping him drink some water. I explained our situation in brief, clipped sentences. His eyes widened at the mention of the 47-mile journey ahead. "Sir, with respect, that's insane," he said after a long pause. "Even if we avoid patrols, even if we find water and food, we're talking about crossing mountains with injuries. Special forces would find this challenging." He wasn't wrong. By military protocol, we should stay near the crash site, activate our beacon at first light, and prepare for either rescue or capture. But intelligence before our mission had indicated that prisoners in this region were rarely registered with the Red Cross or acknowledged at all. They simply disappeared. I remembered the file photos, the grim statistics. "Thompson," I said, checking my pistol one last time before tucking it back into my flight suit. "We're going home, even if we have to walk the whole way." Little did I know, then, that walking would soon become the least of our concerns. As dawn approached, bringing with it the distant rumble of vehicles, we faced the first of many impossible choices that would define our journey. First light revealed smoke from our crash site still visible, a black column against the morning sky, and worse, 3 military trucks moving along the riverbed toward it. "They're tracking us," Thompson whispered, now fully alert despite his injuries. We needed to move, but which way? The valley narrowed ahead, creating a natural choke point. Going back meant running straight into the search party. The mountains on either side were steep, offering concealment, but slow progress given our injuries. I made the call. "We go up. They'll expect us to follow the valley." Thompson nodded grimly. We gathered what supplies we could carry and began our ascent, using trees and rock for cover. Each step was agony for both of us, but fear is a powerful analgesic. Halfway up the slope, we found our first piece of luck, a small cave, barely visible behind a curtain of vines. It offered a perfect vantage point of the valley below. We watched as soldiers examined our crash site, dogs sniffing for our trail. Their commander was gesturing animatedly, clearly displeased with finding an empty cockpit. I counted 12 men, all armed with AK-47s, spreading out to search the perimeter. 2 handlers released their dogs, which immediately began tracking toward the forest edge where we'd spent the night. "They'll find our shelter," I whispered. Thompson was checking his watch. "Sir, it's 0930. If we missed our scheduled return, they'll have declared us MIA by now. Search and rescue will be planning," but he didn't need to finish. We both knew the reality. SR wouldn't cross into hostile territory without diplomatic clearance, which could take days or never come at all. The radio from my survival kit could receive, but not transmit at any useful distance. As we huddled in the cave, I managed to catch fragments of military chatter, enough to piece together that our downing was being celebrated as a major victory. More concerning, there was mention of high-value capture and interrogation teams standing by. They wanted us alive, which was somehow more terrifying than the alternative. Thompson's condition was deteriorating, his head injury causing intermittent confusion and nausea. I fashioned a cold compress from moss soaked in the cave's dripping water, watching anxiously as he drifted in and out of consciousness. Night fell again, bringing the temperature down to near freezing. We couldn't risk a fire. Instead, we huddled together for warmth, taking turns keeping watch. Dawn broke with the sound that chilled my blood, barking, coming closer. The dogs had found our scent despite our precautions. Through a gap in the vines, I could see 4 soldiers ascending the slope, following their straining hounds. Thompson was barely conscious. I shook him gently. "We've got company," I whispered. His eyes focused briefly. He reached for his sidearm, but I stopped him. "Too many. We never make it." He nodded weakly. "What then, sir?" I looked around our small sanctuary, mind racing through options, each worse than the last. The barking was growing louder. Minutes, maybe seconds remained before discovery. I thought of my training, the endless scenarios we'd rehearsed, but nothing prepared me for this moment. Then I noticed something at the back of the cave, a narrow fissure, barely visible in the dim light. It might go nowhere, might be a dead end, but it was our only chance. As the voices of our pursuers grew distinct enough to make out words, I made a decision that would either save us or seal our fate in the darkness beneath the mountain. The fissure was barely wide enough for us to squeeze through, opening into a narrow tunnel that sloped sharply downward. The darkness was absolute. Using only touch and the dim light from my emergency flashlight, I helped Thompson navigate the treacherous passage. "Where do you think this leads?" he whispered, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "No idea," I admitted, "but away from those dogs is good enough for now." The air grew colder and damper as we descended. Twice we had to backtrack from dead ends, and once Thompson nearly fell into a sudden drop-off that disappeared into blackness. Above us, muffled by layers of rock, came the sounds of our pursuers entering the cave. We froze, barely breathing, as voices and barking dogs filtered down to our hiding place. Hours passed in that lightless underworld. The flashlight, which I used sparingly, revealed we were in some kind of natural limestone formation, a network of caves carved by ancient water. My watch said we'd been underground for nearly 6 hours when we heard it, the faint sound of running water. Following the noise, we emerged into a larger cavern where a small underground stream flowed. It was the first good news since being shot down. We refilled our canteens, and I cleaned Thompson's head wound, which had finally stopped bleeding. "Sir," he said after taking a long drink, "I think the water has to go somewhere. Maybe out." It was sound reasoning. Underground streams typically emerged above ground eventually. With no better plan, we decided to follow it downstream. The going was slow and treacherous. The stream had worn the rocks smooth and slippery in places, and several times we had to wade through chest-deep pools of frigid water. Thompson's condition was deteriorating again, the cold and exertion taking their toll. I was supporting more of his weight with each passing hour. My own injuries throbbed with dull persistence, but I pushed the pain aside. "Just a little further," I kept saying, though I had no idea if that was true. Then, after what seemed like an eternity in darkness, I saw it, a faint bluish glow ahead. "Thompson, look," I whispered, hope rising in my chest for the first time in days. Natural light. We quickened our pace as much as our exhausted bodies would allow, drawn toward that promise of the world above. The stream emerged from the mountainside through a narrow opening, cascading down to join a larger river perhaps 100 feet below. We'd traveled not only forward but downward, emerging on the opposite side of the mountain from where we'd entered. The valley spread out before us, and in the far distance, I could make out what looked like a small village or outpost. The sun was setting again. We'd spent an entire day underground. Using my survival kit's map and compass, I triangulated our position as best I could. If I was right, we'd actually made significant progress toward the border, though not in the way I'd planned. Thompson managed a weak smile when I told him. "Unconventional navigation, sir," he joked, his voice barely audible over the rushing water. The relief of emerging from the caves was tempered by our new reality. We were still deep in enemy territory, injured with limited supplies. But we'd evaded our immediate pursuers, and now had a potential path forward along the river valley. As we carefully made our way down to the riverbank to find shelter for the night, I spotted something that changed everything. Fresh tire tracks cutting through the mud, leading toward the distant outpost. Vehicles meant roads, and roads could lead to the border, or to more enemy forces. As darkness fell completely, we faced our next critical decision, one that would require not just survival skills, but a gamble that went against every instinct of caution I developed in my military career. Dawn revealed the outpost clearly, a small military installation with a perimeter fence, guard towers, and what looked like a motor pool. Through my survival kit's compact binoculars, I counted 4 transport trucks and, most importantly, a fuel depot. Our position in the rocks, overlooking the compound, gave us excellent visibility without exposing ourselves. "What's the play here, sir?" Thompson asked, his condition somewhat improved after a night's rest. The plan forming in my mind was either brilliant or suicidal, possibly both. "They think we're still on the other side of the mountain," I said slowly. "Their attention is focused there. Meanwhile, we need transportation if we're going to make it to the border before your condition worsens or they widen their search perimeter." The compound followed a predictable pattern. Guard rotations every 4 hours, supply trucks arriving mid-morning, a skeleton crew during meals. I observed 3 consecutive shift changes, memorizing the patterns, noting the vulnerabilities. "We need a diversion," I explained to Thompson as we shared our dwindling rations. Something to draw their attention away from the motor pool long enough for us to acquire transportation. Thompson's eyes widened as he understood what I was suggesting. "You want to steal a truck? From a military base? With the 2 of us looking like this?" He gestured to our battered flight suits, his blood-stained bandages, my makeshift sling. He wasn't wrong about the challenges, but alternatives were scarce. "Got a better idea?" I asked. His silence was answer enough. As night fell again, we made our preparations. Using the small toolkit from my survival pack, I fashioned 2 improvised explosive devices from emergency flares, our remaining water purification tablets, and fuel siphon from a maintenance generator on the compound's perimeter during a guard cigarette break. Nothing lethal, but enough to create confusion and noise. Thompson, despite his injuries, insisted on playing his part. "I can still pull a trigger if needed, sir," he said with grim determination. The plan was simple in concept, nearly impossible in execution. I would place the diversionary devices at the far corner of the compound, opposite the motor pool. Once detonated, Thompson would cover me from our overlook position while I infiltrated the distracted base, hot-wired a truck, and picked him up from a predetermined rendezvous point. At 0200 hours, under a moonless sky, I made my approach to the compound, moving slow and low through the underbrush. Years of survival training had prepared me for this moment. Yet nothing quite replicates the ice-cold focus of operating behind enemy lines. I placed the devices as planned, set to detonate in 15 minutes, then withdrew to our secondary position. Thompson gave me a silent nod as I joined him. Now came the hardest part, the wait. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. At exactly 0217, the night erupted with a series of sharp explosions and blinding flashes. Shouts of alarm echoed across the compound as guards rushed toward the disturbance. Emergency lights flooded the area exactly opposite from where I needed to go. "Now," I whispered, more to myself than to Thompson. I moved toward the fence line, wire cutters in hand, heartbeat thundering in my ears. What happened in the next 7 minutes would either secure our escape or seal our fate as prisoners of war in a conflict that history might never record. The fence yielded to my wire cutters with surprising ease. Clearly, this outpost wasn't designed to repel determined infiltrators. Most personnel had rushed to the site of the explosions, leaving the motor pool virtually unguarded. I sprinted across open ground, keeping to shadows where possible, and reached the line of transport trucks. The third vehicle in line had keys dangling from the ignition, an unexpected stroke of luck. I slid into the driver's seat, my broken collarbone protesting sharply as I turned the key. The engine roared to life, sounding impossibly loud in the night. Immediately, a shout went up from somewhere to my right. "I've been spotted. No time for subtlety now." I slammed the truck into gear and accelerated toward the main gate. The guard at the gate barely had time to register what was happening before I was upon him. He dove out of the way as I crashed through the barrier, wood splintering against the truck's reinforced bumper. In the rearview mirror, I could see figures running, gesturing wildly. Gunfire erupted, bullets pinging off the truck's metal body. I swerved erratically to make myself a harder target, all while keeping an eye out for the rendezvous point where Thompson would be waiting. The road curved sharply around the base of the hill, and there he was, exactly where planned, waving weakly. I skidded to a stop just long enough for him to climb aboard. "Nice driving, sir," he managed through gritted teeth as he collapsed into the passenger's seat. "Floor it. They're mobilizing." Behind us, the outpost was in full alarm. I could see headlights bouncing as vehicles gave chase. The truck's engine strained as I pushed it to its limits on the rough mountain road. "How far to the border?" Thompson asked, checking the pistol he'd kept holstered throughout our ordeal. According to my calculations from the survival kit map, we were still about 30 miles from friendly territory, maybe 2 hours of driving on these treacherous roads. 2 hours if they don't catch us first, I replied, wrestling with the steering wheel as we hit a particularly deep rut. The first rays of dawn were appearing on the horizon, illuminating a landscape both beautiful and deadly. In daylight, we'd be easy targets for air reconnaissance. Our only chance was to make as much distance as possible before full light, then find somewhere to conceal the vehicle. The road forked ahead. One path continued along the valley floor, faster but exposed. The other climbed back into the mountains, slower but offering potential cover. I chose the mountains without hesitation. As we ascended, the pursuing headlights grew more distant, eventually disappearing altogether. Think we lost them? Thompson asked hopefully. Temporarily, I cautioned. They'll have patrols on all routes to the border once they realize which way we're headed. We drove in tense silence for another hour, gaining elevation with each switchback turn. The truck's fuel gauge was dropping steadily, another factor in our race against time. Just as the sun crested the eastern mountains, bathing the valley in golden light, we rounded a bend and I slammed on the brakes, nearly sending Thompson through the windshield. Blocking the road ahead was a military checkpoint, one not marked on any of our intelligence maps. A barrier stretched across the road, manned by at least 6 armed soldiers. They hadn't spotted us yet. We'd rounded the corner just as they were changing shifts. I reversed quickly, backing up around the bend before we could be seen. "Into the road," Thompson whispered, his face ashen with pain and exhaustion. But I wasn't ready to surrender, not after coming this far. I studied our surroundings with desperate intensity. To our right, the mountain dropped away steeply. To our left, a narrow game trail wound up through dense forest, possibly an old logging route. It was barely wider than a footpath, certainly not designed for vehicles. "Hold on," I said, putting the truck in gear again. "This might get rough." Thompson's eyes widened as he realized my intention. "Sir, with respect, that's not a road." I managed a grim smile as I turned the wheel sharply left. "It is now." As we lurched onto the steep trail, metal scraping against trees and rocks, I knew we were committed to a path that few would have a desperation or madness to attempt. But sometimes, survival isn't about following the map. It's about making your own way home, no matter what stands in your path. The makeshift road was barely passable, branches scraping against the truck's sides as we crawled upward at a torturous pace. Twice we nearly slid backward down the steep incline when the wheels lost traction on loose rocks. The fuel gauge now hovered near empty, and the engine was beginning to overheat from the strain. "How much further?" Thompson asked, his voice faint. I checked our position against landmarks visible through breaks in the forest canopy. "If we can crest this ridge, we should be within 5 miles of the border. 5 miles that might as well be 500 if the truck gave out here." As if hearing my thoughts, the engine sputtered ominously. I nursed it as best I could, easing off the accelerator on level stretches, but the damage was done. We were running on fumes in more ways than one. Just as we reached what appeared to be the highest point of the trail, the engine died completely. Momentum carried us a few more yards before the truck rolled to a final stop. The silence was sudden and absolute. "End of the line," I said, turning to Thompson. "We walk from here." His condition had deteriorated again. The jostling ride had reopened his head wound, and fever flushed his cheeks. But determination still burned in his eyes. "Lead the way, sir." We gathered what supplies remained and abandoned the vehicle, covering it as best we could with branches to delay its discovery. According to my compass, the border lay due east across one final ridge. On foot, moving stealthily with our injuries, it would take at least 3 hours. And we could no longer count on going undetected. The checkpoint we'd bypassed would eventually report our absence to search parties. The final leg of our journey became a blur of pain and exhaustion. Thompson could barely walk unassisted, leaning heavily on my good shoulder. Each step sent jolts of agony through my broken collarbone. We rested frequently, listening intently for pursuit. Around midday, we heard it, the distinctive thump of helicopter rotors growing steadily louder. We took cover under a dense thicket of pines as an enemy search helicopter passed directly overhead, so close I could see the door gunners scanning the terrain below. They were expanding their search perimeter, tightening the net. Once the helicopter passed, we pushed on with renewed urgency, knowing time was running short. The border was tantalizingly close now, just beyond the next ridge, according to our map. We crested the final hill as afternoon shadows lengthened across the valley. Below us lay a narrow river, the border marker according to our briefings. Beyond it, the terrain looked identical, but represented safety, medical attention, home. We were so close. Then came the sound that stopped my heart, voices coming up the slope behind us. The search party had found our abandoned truck more quickly than I'd anticipated. Go, Thompson whispered, trying to push me forward. I'll slow them down. I stared at him in disbelief. That's not happening, Lieutenant. We started together, we finished together. With the last of my strength, I half-carried, half-dragged him down the slope toward the river. The voices grew louder, more excited. They'd spotted us. The first shots rang out, kicking up dirt near our feet. The river was 30 yards away, then 20, then 10. I could hear shouts in both directions now, some from behind, and new voices from across the river. As we stumbled into the knee-deep water, I looked up to see figures in familiar uniforms on the opposite bank, weapons raised. U.S. Air Force. I shouted with what little breath I had left. Friendlies coming in hot. The Border Patrol team reacted instantly, laying down, covering fire as they waded out to meet us. Strong hands grabbed us, pulling us toward safety as bullets cut through the water around us. Thompson had lost consciousness completely by now, his weight a dead drag against my exhausted body. The last few yards were a chaotic blur of shouting, gunfire, and splashing water. Then suddenly, impossibly, we were on the other side, being hustled into a waiting Humvee. As medics swarmed around us, applying fresh bandages and starting IVs, I finally let the tension of the past 4 days release. You did it, sir, one of the border guards said with unmistakable awe in his voice. 47 miles through enemy territory with those injuries. That's going in the history books. I shook my head weakly. Is Thompson, the medic working on my collarbone, nodded reassuringly. He'll make it. You both will. As the Humvee roared to life, carrying us to a waiting medevac helicopter, I gazed back across the river at the hostile territory we'd just escaped. In that moment, I understood something fundamental about survival that no training manual could ever teach. Something about the human spirit that emerges only when every other resource has been exhausted. It wasn't just skill or training that brought us home. It was something deeper, something that connects every pilot who's ever faced impossible odds and found a way through. It was a lesson I would carry long after my physical wounds had healed. What makes the difference between those who survive against impossible odds and those who surrender to circumstances? It's not just training or equipment. It's the unwavering conviction that giving up is never an option. Through freezing mountain caves, enemy checkpoints, and treacherous terrain, this journey tested every limit of human endurance. But it also revealed what we're truly capable of when our backs are against the wall. Think about your own life for a moment. What obstacles seem insurmountable to you right now? What challenges have you convinced yourself are beyond your capabilities? The truth is, you possess the same determination that carried us across that border. It's hardwired into your DNA. The only difference is choosing to access it, to refuse the easy path of surrender. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where all logical pathways to success seemed blocked? Did you push forward anyway, or did you retreat? The next time you face what seems like an impossible situation, remember this story. Remember that sometimes the path forward isn't on any map. You have to create it yourself, one painful step at a time. This isn't just a story about military survival. It's about the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit that lives within each of us. Are you tapping into yours? Are you challenging the boundaries of what you believe is possible? Or are you allowing self-imposed limitations to dictate the course of your life? If this story resonated with you, I invite you to join our community of those who refuse to accept limitations. Subscribe to this channel and activate notifications to receive more stories of extraordinary courage and the lessons they teach us. Share your own stories of perseverance in the comments below. What impossible situation did you overcome? How did it change you?